Hi, everybody. I am joined now on our next series with two people that have been part of my transplant journey the entire time. I'm joined by Dr. Manreet Kanwar and Kari Mohney, who both have extremely long titles, which I'm not going to try to remember. But Dr. Kanwar is the medical director for the cardiac transplant team, and Kari is my former transplant coordinator, my post-transplant coordinator. So thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So,
Thank you very much.
Dr. Kanwar is, I don't know if you even remember this or not, but kind of a fun fact is you were the first person to treat me in any way when I first came to AGH. You put a balloon pump in on my very first day in Pittsburgh.
I actually, in fact, do remember that. And I still remember you were my 7th case for that day in the cath lab. And I remember thinking, do I really have to do this today, or can I push this off till tomorrow? But I'd not met you. I knew you were in the hospital and you were not doing well. You'd been transferred from another hospital where you had kind of bounced in and out a couple times. And I remember thinking, well, he's pretty young. Maybe I should do something today rather than tomorrow. So I said, it was 3 p.m. Let me just go see him. And I remember the first thing when I saw you is you were actually, you were very young at the time. Now you're much older, but you were very young at the time. And young people can compensate being sick very well till they crash. So I think we caught you literally in that, I would say, very narrow window before you kind of went downhill. And I remember thinking that we literally have hours before you're gonna potentially get sicker and sicker. So we did the heart catheterization and we realized that your heart was actually very, very weak and was barely able to, keep you alive or keep your heartbeat going. And I remember, thinking that this cannot end well. This is not something our medications and, the usual stuff we do, you're already beyond that point, unfortunately. And we needed to shift gears, and hence came the balloon pump. And that started a series of investigations that eventually led us to believe that, unfortunately, the heart that you had at the time had run its course, and way premature, obviously, but very dramatic. And we see this, unfortunately, more often than not, is that sometimes young people get better and live happily ever after, and sometimes the heart just refuses to cooperate. So unfortunately, you were in the latter category, and that started your journey. So actually, I do remember.
Well, it's funny because Dr. Morale was the first physician of mine, I should say, that told me I was going to need a heart transplant. But before that, I had been at Conemaugh in Johnstown, and I have a friend who's a PA, and she had worked on the cardiac unit in Conemaugh before. And I told her, and at the time I was in Conemaugh, and I had no idea, how bad things were. And I told her the diagnosis. I said I had viral cardiomyopathy, and I told her my heart function level, my EF. And she freaked out. And she said, oh my God, you need a heart transplant. You need to get to Pittsburgh. You're going to have to get a heart transplant. But no doctors had been saying this at this point. So yeah. I was like, you're overreacting. Calm down. This is ridiculous. You're being crazy. And then I got to Pittsburgh and we found out I did need a heart transplant. So everything moved along pretty quick after that, though.
Because if I remember correctly, you were not sick for very long, right? You were sick for a short period of time.
Yeah. I was actually still a week before I came to AGH, I was still at work. And actually, I went to work. The last day I was at work, I called my mom that morning and I told her that I noticed my legs were swollen. And she freaked out, wanting me to go to the ER. And I said, well, I got to go to work. So I went to work and I went to the hospital at lunchtime. And I told my HR director when I left, because she asked how long I expected to be out. And I said, oh, I should be back tomorrow, no problem. And then I got to the ER and they ran all these tests, and the cardiologist in State College, he came into the room and he told me he was surprised that I was conscious because my EF function was so low. But yeah, I wasn't sick long. I probably didn't look too great to the outsider's eye, but I didn't feel that.
But, it was, again, it's the conundrum is when somebody is young and otherwise healthy and they suddenly get sick, their body is able to deal with it to a pretty decent extent for a period of time. And I still remember Dr. Sokos, who worked with us at the time. He had gotten the first phone call and they were saying, he's okay, you can see him in clinic. And when he heard about your age and your heart function, your ejection fraction, he was like, why don't you just send him over?
Yeah.
So that kind of,
that's one of the funnier parts that I tell when I tell my story out at these community events. Is I was at Conemaugh and we called Dr. Sokos at the advice of a family friend who recommended him, and they said that we could, do you want to come to Pittsburgh now? But I had been in the hospital all week between State College and Johnstown, and I told my parents, I said, let me go home and rest for a few days outside of the hospital, and we'll go down to the clinic next week. And then a little bit later, I ended up going to the ICU that night because a little bit later, the one of the nurses came in, and because I told her I had some, it felt like heartburn, and she went to get my blood pressure, and she said very calmly. So I always give props to medical people because she said it so calmly. She goes, okay, well, I can't get a blood pressure, so I'm going to call a code, some code color. And I was like, okay. And I just didn't even think about it. And the next thing I know, I had like 15 nurses come running in the room, and a doctor comes running in, and I ended up going to the ICU, and I was unstable all that night. So I didn't have a choice at that point. And thankfully, I didn't have a choice, and I came to Pittsburgh the next morning, and then that's how I got going. And then obviously I met Kari after my transplant. I was there I waited for 1.5 years, and then I got my transplant, and Kari's had to put up with me ever since. I'm a pain in the butt for Kari, but I was probably more of a pain in the butt for my pre-transplant coordinators. But I don't know. Do you think I've been more of a pain in the butt for you, Kari?
I think you've been a pain in the butt since the beginning. I actually received your offer, and I came up into your room with the LVAD coordinator, that Chris, who was your LVAD coordinator at the time, and came in and said, we're really happy for you. We're gonna get on the ball, and all you were worried about was whether or not you were going to get the Penn State game. I think it was Penn State and Ohio State.
It was a big game. It was Penn State and Ohio State.
Yeah. And priorities.
I don't even think you looked at me. I'm like, I'm Kari. I'm a transplant coordinator. I just want to tell you. And you were like, am I going to get to see the game?
We got destroyed that game, and I didn't get to see it. So it might have kind of been a blessing. But you got to remember, at that point, I had been in the hospital for 10 days. With bleeding in my stomach. So I probably wasn't in the greatest mood whenever you came into the room anyways, even though that it signified that I was finally getting my transplant after 1.5 years. So, but, you both have had a really great chance to, obviously get to know me, but also my family. My parents were there night and day, the entire time, before the transplant, after the transplant. Anytime they could be in the room, they were in the room. So you obviously get to form those relationships with patients and their families. So one of the things that I probably can't speak on really well compared to other transplant patients is the wait. I waited for 1.5 years, but
I thought you were referring to your weight.
Yeah, I had a relatively easy experience during my wait. I didn't have a lot of.
No, I just meant the WEIGHT.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, that weight was a different fluctuation. So, but so I waited 1.5 years, but it was overall okay. But there's other people that wait can be just very, very stressful, very hard to deal with. So what do you guys see as people that deal with patients and their families, and how hard that is for them?
So Craig, I say this, I said this jokingly, but if you recall, we talked about this, that the average weight of a patient who is on, let's say, an organ waiting list, be it heart or any other organ, it depends on several factors. It depends on their blood group type, their body size, how sick they are, how high up on the list they are or not, and fate. It's some things you can control, but most you can't. And in your case, you were one of the few people, in fact, I've seen who, in spite of being on the LVAD, and you got sick very young, and we see this often, is that young people, they just don't know how to handle the situation often. So their attitude, adds on to even a shorter to my eyes, wait seems very, very long. But you were one of those few people who actually took your life under control and you actually lost weight. And that helped you with your actual waiting time on the transplant list, because unfortunately, it's very hard for us to match organs as it is with all the other factors that are in play. So you're right. I mean, this wait that patients have, we have several people who have spent 3-4 years on this list. And unfortunately, the sad truth of the matter is, it's right in the sense that this is how it should be, that sicker the patient, the quicker they get a heart. And unfortunately, that means that the lesser sick people just have a longer and longer wait. Now, whether this is right or wrong, and this is an ongoing debate, is shouldn't you do the transplant when people are less sick as opposed to when they get very sick?
Right.
But the fact of the matter is the waiting list we have in this country, or anywhere for that matter, is very, very long. And most people will continue to just wait forever and ever. And it's, I would say, a gift beyond anything else for those who do get the match. And sometimes the list, the waiting time is very short, and sometimes it's very, very long. But I would say on an average, a year, 2 years, again, depending on how sick or not sick you are. We've matched people in a day, and we've had people who have been waiting for 5 years with no luck. So a lot of factors, unfortunately, go into that. And it's nerve-wracking, people don't want to travel, because what if the call comes, you suspend your life at some level. And that's what we try to tell people is, it's not going to be, it's not going to be easy. It's never easy. I have no idea what it is like to be on the receiving end of that call. And in fact, I was wondering, the joke about the game aside, how is it like to receive a call? I mean, you were here, so
I didn't get a call.
Yeah, well, yeah, but
that special in-person visit, Dr. Sokos came in and sat down on the side of my bed, and that's another part of my story I always tell, because it's terrible laying around the hospital all day, every day, and it's broken up by your meals. And I remember Dr. Sokos came in, and it was amazing news to find out I was getting my transplant, but it was like 11 o'clock right before lunchtime. And I was like, man, it's going to be a really long day now that I'm not going to be able to eat the rest of the day. So yeah, I didn't get the call, but it was, still, it's almost surreal, because for that whole time that you're waiting, you really do feel like everything is just on pause. It's like, oh, yeah, I want to switch jobs. Oh, I can't because I have health insurance through this work and I can't jeopardize that. Or, oh, do you want to take a trip like you said? And well, what if the call comes? You have to have cell phone service at all time. In my case with the LVAD, I had to have batteries on me at all time. I had to plug myself into the wall at night like a phone. And so it is, when you finally get that news that kind of pushes the unpause button on your life, it really is just kind of surreal for a few minutes until it kind of sinks in. And Kari, you kind of get the opposite end of that as a post-transplant coordinator. You get the happy patients who have gotten their transplant and they come out on the other side. So I mean, your experience is probably a little bit different, because you get to experience the gratitude. Yeah,
I think I see how emotionally trying it is for our patients beforehand, because afterwards they're still in like shell shock, honestly. And there's so many emotions that go into receiving a transplant. The fact that someone died in order to receive a heart transplant or any transplant, that weighs very, very heavily on our patients. And, a lot of them will hold that inside and they won't really talk about it, because they are grateful and they do want to move on, because they've waited so long. They want to move on with their lives. They're just ready to go. But their gratitude is unending, both for their transplant team and for their donor and donor family.
So on the opposite side, we're talking now about how the patients and the families feel, but for both of you being on the transplant team, being on the front line of that situation, how hard is it for you to kind of deal with having a job where there's just such emotional highs and lows? Obviously a high point would be somebody getting their transplant, but then both of you have lost patients that you've known over the years. Of course, being in the medical field, it's just part of the job. But how do you kind of deal with that, and how do you kind of separate that and deal with those highs and lows?
So the highs are easy. I'll start with that. And I can honestly tell you, I've been doing this. This is my 9th year. It's a thrill every single time. Every single time. I don't think there's a bigger thrill to just know that things are finally coming together for your patient, and that they're going to get a second chance at feeling better, etc., etc. And we have to hold on to those moments because they have to carry us through the several other moments when we get the call and the patient gets a transplant and they don't even make it out of the hospital in a meaningful way, or they never get the call and they just keep waiting. So I think, again, it's like you said, it's an emotional roller coaster at times, but at some level we have to detach ourselves, but not at a point when you can't be connected to the person. So at the end of the day, I get to go home while you may be stuck in the ICU, with the bleeding stomach and whatnot. But I think that's where having the emotional connection with the person, the patient, and having a team on one side. This, takes a village to do this job. I couldn't work without my pre-transplant, post-transplant coordinators, the whole village, and often we have to pick each other's up, but when a good news comes, we celebrate together as well. So I can definitely say the highs outweigh the lows, because you just choose to let them outweigh the lows. Because if you focus on just the lows, then it would be a very depressing job. I always tell folks, that ask me, or even my family members, is like, isn't that a bit much? But I always tell them but I get to see miracles. Right. So it's all worth it. And then at some level, it makes us be happy about our own health, our own, you cherish that more, especially when you see somebody struggling, somebody, of an equivalent age, for example, and I watch them go through this. Then you just realize, you have your blessings, if you have your health, and just makes you value it more. So you try to give it a positive spin, but yes, some days they just suck.
And again, for you, Kari, it's kind of on a different end of the spectrum, because again, you take care of patients after they got their transplant, but of course, there are those times, unfortunately, where transplant recipients have complications, or sometimes they live a very long and full life with their transplant, but eventually they too pass away. And after working with them so closely for so many years, I mean, how do you kind of deal with that?
Well, I think the highlight of my job, and really one of the highlights of my life, is that I get to deliver the news that someone is going to receive a transplant. Those phone calls are amazing. They never get old. But then moving on to working as a post-transplant coordinator, everyone, you get close to them. They become family. A lot of people, they ask me how I'm doing, like call me to ask me how I'm doing, which is crazy. Like, that's how close you become with, the population of, transplant patients that I've been working with. And it's just really awesome. It's very fulfilling. And so to speak to what Manreet said, Dr. Kanwar, I think that the good outweighs the bad, no matter what. So even in the sad times, or the hard times, the good outweighs the bad.
Well, I could say, through not only my transplant, but as a person who has a long history of breaking bones, most recently my ankle and foot a few years ago, and many others throughout the years, I have unfortunately spent a decent amount of time in the hospital over my lifetime. And my parents and everybody else in my family or friends that were around during this time, they'll attest to the fact that our relationship and the care and treatment that we got at AGH was just, from the very first minute until right now, where you guys agreed to come on camera on Friday night at 8 o'clock has just been incredible, and I couldn't be more thankful. So I'm going to take a second and just shout out the rest of the team, the OG team, because quite frankly, I don't know some of the newer members, unfortunately, but the OG Craig Transplant team, Dr. Morali, Dr. Benza, Dr. Sokos, Dr. Agarwal, Dr. Reyna, Amanda Hopwood, my old our LVAD coordinator, Ellie Donaldson, my old LVAD coordinator. Who am I missing?
You're missing
Chris, my old LVAD coordinator, and then I certainly know all the other
surgeon.
Dr. Bailey. Dr. Bailey, if you see this, you still owe me a round of golf, but this is a thankful moment. So that whole team was just really incredible. I still get to see them just from working with coming down to AGH and trying to raise awareness with Second Chance and doing some events and helping out with the transplant recipient support group that Kari has started and really kind of taken off with. So I love the fact that I consider you guys friends and the whole team, and I can still have that ongoing relationship. Hopefully, no time soon will I be relying on you guys for any more medical procedures, but we'll keep the friendship going for now. But thank you both very much for joining us, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.